Hello, this is Fugly here. I haven't actually read the paper on that got the 2022 Nobel Prize for Physics, okay? And not qualified to try. However, it sounds like it has nothing to do with simulations at all. And as per usual, the Woo Brigade came along and extrapolated that it proved simulations, probably based on someone suggesting that it could be an alternative hypothesis later on. So, as per normal, buzzword, the Woo Brigade has jumped the gun. Physics has, of course, unsurprisingly, not proven that the world's a simulation. Oh, yay. As if that wasn't obvious. Anyway, what they appear to have shown, and there'll be a post with the link to what was seen to get this information in a minute, hopefully, was that they don't believe anymore that space-time is fundamental to figuring out how shit works, basically. Space-time isn't necessary to have isn't necessary to explain stuff, okay? Is one way of looking at it. And something about the universe being not locally real is where they might have jumped the gun, okay? So let's explain this. In the context of what does that word mean? So, like locally versus non-locally, okay? Planet Earth versus outer space, probably likely to be the case. Real versus not real is a bit more nebulous terms to work with. They didn't explain their operational definition of the term real. However, in some epistemological circles or ideas, real is distinct from representational. And you can sort of loosely take the word representational to mean symbolic or a construct. And real to exist. Alternatively, you can also take the word real to mean the noumena as opposed to the phenomena, depending on which philosopher you're talking about. So, in a sort of Kantian sense, you get the noumena versus phenomena thing. Phenomena is normal physical stuff. So an example of phenomena would be, classical physics would probably cover that. If you drop a pen, it falls to the ground. What's the maths that goes with that type of thing? However, in the Kantian language, the phenomena isn't real. Noumena is. Or real encompasses both the phenomena and the noumena is another way of looking at it. So, Kant was referring to there being more to the world than is perceivable through ordinary means, or more specifically, there is a distinction between sensation and perception, is probably another way of looking at it. And so perception is greater in some ways than sensation. And so phenomena is a subcategory of the real, and so is the noumena. And the noumena refers to noumena can include, as far as recalled, metaphysical constructs and stuff as well, okay? For Kantian, the nature of existence, or not necessarily nature, the categorization of that which exists and that which does not, might have also included in his philosophy non-physical things as noumena, okay? And so he would have seen the metaphysical as real, but not measurable, okay? So the rational empiricism that came out of that was you can measure the phenomena, so do it. You can use reason on the noumena, or the metaphysical, basically, so do it. If there was ever a time that the noumena could be measured as though it were a phenomena, do that. But ultimately, what can you do but empirically basically derive your scientific comprehension of reality it has to be based on things that you can actually measure, okay? So you can, in fact, pick up a pen and drop it to the ground, presumably, okay? Unless there is something extremely subjective, and we'll get into that in a minute, because this is actually a far more heady debate than might be comprehended at first, okay? So, that's Kant. So, the idea of what's real and what exists is, just straight off the bat, what's real and what exists isn't necessarily the same thing, according to those ideas. And additionally, do you then, in a completely different subcategory, include the symbolic? Where do you put the symbolic or the representational? Is it distinct from that which exists, yet is nonetheless real? Or is it something that is real, yet nonetheless does not exist? Okay, so are you confused yet? Well, you're supposed to be. When you hear that the words real and exist don't mean the same thing in philosophy or epistemology as is common parlance suggests they would, then you're already heading down into the territory of why you might find a situation where the word brigade hears words like the universe is locally not real and presumes to mean that it's fake or a simulation of some kind, right? When actually the physicists haven't told us what operational definition of the word real they've actually used and what they mean by that in that particular research paper. They haven't said that. They've just spouted their jargon and walked away. And so that context-dependent idea of the word real being distinct from that which exists can cause confusion for people on its own. So from a different perspective, this is a fairly simple way to figure out what this might mean. So this physical body, when they were at university, did a essay on just that. The epistemology of mathematics, is it representational or is it real? As one of the topics of interest. And without being very good at mathematics at all, was really following through rationally on what those ideas might entail. And the rough guesstimate of a fairly lengthy discussion is basically that mathematics is a language and symbolic and therefore representational, and there is a distinction between the language used and that which is described by the same language. So if you have the word bag, for example, the guess here is that you're a speaker of one of the dialects of English. Therefore, you are able to pass the language being used right now as sounds. So the word bag to you likely refers to a container that can be carried over one or both shoulders, which may or may not have a zip or buttons, or may not be made from plastic and may or may not be held in the hands. So a bag could be slung over the shoulders or held in the hands. The point is it is a sort of roughly softish, not quite soft, could be hard like a suitcase, container of some kind used for transporting objects. Okay, so all that sort of loose use of language there sort of like shows that there's more than one type of bag. But the main theme is bag is container for transporting objects by hand or back. And at no point do you see a bag physically when that word is used in this video. In fact, it is low light, so you might not be seeing the face speaking at all, despite there being a recording. You might just be hearing it. For all you know, this is a artificial intelligence generated video. It's not, however, it could be, and it could be a simulacrum of previous videos by, Grok or something. Again, it's not. So, just for argument's sake, that would be representational, not the actual thing, in a similar way that the sound or the word bag is different from the actual object bag. Okay? The actual object can have many different adjectives to describe it, and there are different types as well in that category of word. So mathematics as a language, being representative of the things, is not actually the things. So the word one, or the sound one, represents a single unit of something, and however does not sound like the way that the squiggle on a piece of paper looks like, and one cup looks drastically different from one warship. Okay, they're very different from each other, and so basically there's a very odd situation where people have become accustomed to language being a very strong cultural assertion and part of life, to the point where sometimes language or symbolism is all there is to work with. in information about a topic or a thing. And that is an example, perhaps, of what Baudrillard called the map. And so Baudrillard was a philosopher from about 1920 or something like that. He's one of those French guys that like lattes, okay, and croissants, back in the old Pablo Picasso days. And probably even hung around with him, you never know. And, you know, Sartre and all that. And so that guy made an observation that is relevant to this discussion about the representational versus the real before you get into anything to do with Descartes or any other types of philosophers, particularly as it relates to epistemology. A basic idea is that the map, in Baudrillardian terms, gets more detailed and more involved and more engaging than the terrain. So he used it sociologically. He was referring to newspapers telling great stories and tabloids and political gossiping and all kinds of drama going on, and so on and so forth, and that's acting as a kind of overlay to the actual reality of situations, a map that was distracting from the reality or the terrain that they were actually living in. And that guy's commentary is so relevant when it comes to things like YouTube and television and the 21st century. It's not even funny. It is so true, it's not even funny. You can totally see what that guy's talking about, potentially. And to use that example as the representational or the map becoming stronger than the reality or the terrain, you can see that physics has done exactly that, particularly in the last 20 years, if not the last 50 years. Physics has no longer been a science in the most strictest sense of the term. It's gone from the terrain or the real into the representational. The abstractions that they're working with are extraordinary. They do have a rather complex array of technologies with which to allegedly measure phenomena, but the noumena of the subatomic particles and their various and sundry strangeness is metaphysically overlaid with the representational maps of their theoretical physics and mathematics. And so it's almost as though in 2022, when they decided that it was probably a good idea to maybe consider that space-time wasn't fundamental to all of their ideas, was a basic acknowledgement that the idea of space-time is a map, not a terrain, which, by the way, this physical body has been arguing since they were 9 years old. And it's going to sound really fucking stupid, okay? This is why this is so obvious to a kid, but it was never obvious to theoretical physicists until 2022. Okay? Get this. It's really simple. People made clocks. Okay? Now that sounds kind of but the sun goes across the sky, and I was like, no. People made clocks. Okay? yes, the sun goes across the sky. Yes, the moon goes across the sky, and so on and so forth. But to say that there is an actual thing called space-time as a consequence of observing a repeated, seemingly cyclical phenomena is to project the presumption of the order of your perception onto something that might not have order. Or in other words, people made the clocks. Someone who has no comprehension of the cyclical ordered nature of social realities such as routines, calendars, and things like that, and is actually being taught that somewhat militaristically through the education system about now 9 till 3 you go to school and blah 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 blah, and then you have your school holidays, blah 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 blah, and then it's Christmas time, blah 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 blah. Okay, that type of stuff is how people come to have this egregore, if you will, to use the esoteric term, called space-time in the first place. Okay, people aren't actually born with the perception of space-time at all. Okay, if you ask a kid to go stand in the naughty corner for 10 minutes, they'll be running around after 30 seconds, acting like you'd made them go to prison for a whole year. If you simply distract them, they won't notice. They don't have a perception of time. They don't have much of a perception of space either. They learn that through physical movement. But time, they don't learn naturally through their body movements. They can see the sun move. They can see the moon move. They know all of that stuff. They even know about things called birthdays. Things like birthdays teach them what time is. They're going to get older and bigger someday. Okay? That takes this thing called time. And their perception of time is fluid, dynamic, practically non-existent. They don't, as it were, seem to experience life as though it was a ordered phenomena based on a, let's face it, corporate routine, okay, or agricultural one, or whatever, okay, they just do whatever. Go to bed, you say to them. Oh, but just 5 more minutes. It's been half an hour. No, it's only been 2 minutes, Ma. How often is anyone a parent and how they heard that? This physical body isn't even a parent, and I can pick up on that. So, as you might imagine, a 9-year-old with absolutely no perception of time whatsoever, okay, didn't believe it existed, never did throughout the entirety of their adulthood, and just stuck with the idea that people made clocks. Well, everyone told them that they were a complete nut job because calendars and clocks are everywhere, and the physicists keep talking about space-time, the space-time continuum. And now in 2022 they go, well, space-time is not fundamental to reality anyway, or whatever, fundamental to their equations or something. They can take it out and, still figure it out or something like that. And it's like, well, what took you so fucking long? Your kids have been telling you that for fucking millennia. Like, seriously, you're fucking slow? Anyway, so epistemologically, we could say epistemology means how do you know shit? And it's like, well, you can't prove that in a lab, can you? Okay, you can't prove Don't know lab at all. And they reckon they were proving space-time lab. No, they didn't. They never proved the existence of space-time in the lab. They used it as a unit of measurement to relate to the other stuff that they were measuring in a lab. So plot this particle or that particle on imaginary continuum called space-time. So at no point did the actual continuum space-time exist. So again, when certain individuals became adults and they started telling people, but space-time is just a unit of measurement, you haven't actually proven that it exists, you've only drawn a squiggle on a piece of paper to compare those two things together, it's your graph, not the reality. And they were told, but space-time is real, space-time is real, okay? And they were being told that they were crazy, okay? It just goes to show that Sam Bakkington's chronon fields don't exist because space-time doesn't exist. Okay, so it is in fact just a unit of measurement, and they've more or less finally figured that out. And it makes you wonder how smart those people are as they thousands of times plotted space-time as a line on a fucking graph and never once picked it up or held it in their hand except when it was a clock that a person made. So on that subject, we're going to point out again, okay, the kids aren't fucking stupid, okay? They literally, a child, this physical body when she was a kid, literally did The Emperor Has No Clothes on space-time and continued with that argument even in philosophy at university and for years afterwards. And while they were being told they were a fucking Fruit Loop, and now you guys finally give some three old guys a fucking Nobel Prize in physics for it. Okay, are you going to stop calling this body crazy, please? And maybe give us some fucking credit. Okay, so, anyway, if you look at it like that, at no point does that prove the world a simulation. What a fucking surprise, because a simulation requires, what is that, a simulation? A computer program that's super advanced with super high res can do some complicated shit. Okay, anyone can basically come up with the idea that implies both a computer and a program, and that's like another God of the Gas fucking argument, okay? You haven't got proof of that argument. They haven't said they've got proof of that argument. They said it might lead to that hypothesis later on the basis of maybe they've proven that the universe is not locally real. So back to the subject of real. Space-time is obviously not real. Okay, it's representational because it is a symbolic thing on a fucking graph. It's a unit of measurement. So, are they starting to ask the question, finally, just how much of their ideas are mere projections of their worldviews, okay, of their mathematics onto the objects? Are they projecting their ideas onto the objects, or are the objects revealing their truths? And the answer is neither, okay? Because what's actually happening, okay, is that the physicists don't actually exist, okay? Okay, right? The physicists don't actually exist, okay, because physicists are John Nash characters. They live in a state of pure mathematical inquiry, okay, which they then project onto the surface of objects and try and claim that what their projections are naturally there, okay? At least that's what they've been doing since they moved away from classical physics, okay? Every man and his dog can pick up an object and drop it and go, there you go, maybe there's something that's pulling stuff to the ground, okay? Right, okay? It's not even rocket science, although rocket science does eventually come out of that, right? Actually, even rocket science is more classical physics than what they're talking about. So, when you get your CERN stuff and they're projecting and stuff like that, they can't even see the particles. They've got their equations put as algorithms or programs into their computers and saying what the output is based on bang. Okay, they don't actually see it at all. The computer just tells them based on prior assumptions, algorithms. So you've got a inherent bias there where the projections they put into the system are influencing the output. Okay, so the reason why they found Higgs boson is because they were looking for it, and they put that program into the computer until they found it. Okay, boson being a mathematical abstraction. Okay, they're well past the point of believability once they've built CERN. Okay, the bad joke about the physicists not existing is they are John Nashes, who exist in a state of pure mathematics and therefore entirely abstract. They're not real. Okay, they're just floating equations that have no inherent meaning whatsoever, and are projections of the minds that output them. So that's a bad joke. So not really bragging, but yeah. You might want to also take into consideration that this physical body also did research at university, or more specifically did a topic on paranormal perception as it relates to solar flares. There's a different video on that there as well on this channel. You're welcome to look at that, and take some of the airy-fairy esoteric stuff out of it if you want, but and have a look at it from a nuts and bolts perspective, and you can see that someone was thinking. And thank you to old white men for proving what 9-year-old mixed race little girls came up with 40 years ago. Have a nice day.